Awesome. So we were talking about biblical manifestation and how we bring from our character and from our knowledge and from our relationship with God, we bring out fruit into our ministries. And we were talking about, it's not a magical process, but it is a systematic process because God created the world. He created an orderly world and he created people to function in an orderly way. That's why everybody has the same emotions, no matter where they live in any culture. Someone doesn't have, you know, some magical emotion that nobody's ever experienced. Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. So people are functional systems, just like the rest of the created world. And therefore, we can kind of understand how we work and how we do things. And everybody goes about taking action in the same sort of way. So we can kind of understand that. Um, did you have any thoughts or questions on anything we have discussed kind of in this section before getting into some other things?
No, I think I'm good.
Sweet. Okay. So, um, now I want to clarify something. Oh, can you see my screen? What are you looking at?
I'm looking at the Zoom. It says launch meeting.
Excellent. Okay, that's the correct screen. Have we looked at this? And I apologize. I do enough trainings that I occasionally I'll get lost. Have we looked at this before?
No.
Awesome. Even better. Okay. So one of the reasons why I talk about these sort of beliefs and the way in which they come out and manifest into our ministry is because we have to, if we are going to have, what do you want to say, if we're going to be empowered and we're not just going to be victims to, and this is kind of a weird way to say this, but if we're just helplessly waiting for God's miraculous intervention at every turn, there's nothing we can do. We just wait, and if God blesses, then he blesses. And unfortunately, a lot of ministry leaders I talk to were so spiritual. That really is what we're just pray and we hope and we wait. And that's not how I read a functional Christian life. We don't sit around and wait. We do things and we do them with God, and there's a partnership. So
Mhm.
when we then see that there are results, there are fruit in our ministry. Ministries have a life cycle, just like anything else, just like a country, just like a person, just like wealth. There's a life cycle to these things. And the question is, well, okay, if we do have an impact on the fruit in our ministry, then how does that work? And that is what we're trying to come to. And not only how does it work, but how do the beliefs and the systems we're putting in place directly affect those things? Um, so when we talk about ministry, have you ever heard of the from the door to the core, or how do I make my front door bigger, or how do I make my back door smaller? Have you heard any of these phrases for? Okay, so in the
Nope.
U.S., that's in some of our I wouldn't really say competitors, but in a lot of other church marketing communities, the question is, well, how do I make my front door bigger? How do I get more people coming through my front door? Which I don't like in principle because Jesus went out. That's like, you know, issue
Yep.
one there. But okay, if you're trying to make your front door bigger, I get it. How do we get more people into the front door? And then how do we get them to the core of the ministry? And the other question that they're asking a lot is, well, we're getting lots of people in the front door, but we're losing them faster than we can get them. So now we have a revolving front door where people are coming in and they're going right back out, but faster. People from the inside are piling on the outdoor faster than people are coming in the indoor.
Mhm.
And that is a large issue. So when we look at our sort of belief broadly in the West, which is what do we do? What's the church supposed to do? And what I see is I see both like anecdotally in my own experience, having gone to, churches for the last 30 years, and also from my professional experience, what do? We get a bunch of people, we get a vision, and the vision is to help those people over there. And so we get all of these people over here into our church, and we talk to them about those people over there, and we raise money and we raise resources, and then we send them over there. And so, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I do think that this can create issues inside the church. And we'll kind of get into that more specifically. Um, and so I think the first question in the next section that we're going into is resource allocation, because decision making is resource allocation. When you're making a decision, you're choosing where to put some kind of resource as opposed to some other kind of resource. And the word decision means the Latin root there is scisio, which is from the word scissor or incision, which means to cut off from in the Latin. I believe it's Latin. And so anytime you make a decision, you're making a sacrifice and you're cutting off from some other possibility. So when my wife married me, I got the better end of the deal, but she cut off from the ability to marry any of, a billion other Christian guys or whatever. So there's always when you make a decision, it's always pruning. And so that's what we're moving into next, which is decision making and pruning. And we're going to look at different models for making decisions. But how do we see the church? We see the church as we're going to help those homeless people out there. We're going to help those, women, the jobless, the disenfranchised, the people in Africa. They're out there and we're going to go help them. And so when we look at the church, we've got these people at the door, and then we've got these people at the core. And what do? We take our resources and we put the resources at least at the front door, but a lot of times even outside the front door, because, it's those homeless people out there on the street or whoever. And we take our resources and we put them on the door, and we get all of our volunteers, and they're smiling, like sometimes kind of weirdly too big, and they're inviting people, and you're supposed to generate a relationship instant, you open the door and now you're best friends. And we've got connect booths and papers, and we've got here's all of our programs and pastors wandering the entryway. And so we've got tons of resources there. And then what happens? Well, those people come in, we invite them back, we send them our follow-up texts. And this is all just kind of good marketing. And as they come in a little further, we say, oh, well, hey, we need volunteers. You want to volunteer? And what do? They feel loved. They feel cared about. They go, wow, man, if they really give me this much attention and they don't even know me, it must be great volunteering for them. And then they volunteer. And that's, of course, kind of subconscious. They're not really thinking that, but that's the expectation. And then so they start volunteering, and then they kind of just get put on duty, and generally and often they feel forgotten about. And I know this is true because when I've looked at the data, not only in my own experience and in experience working with pastors and ministry leaders who are like, yeah, we can't keep volunteers, but also if you look up the keyword data online, volunteer burnout is a big, like in terms of like church, what do you want to say, the church marketing, the church Christian ministry keyword industry, I guess. It's a pretty large keyword. That is a problem. So volunteer burnout, ministry burnout, pastor burnout is a huge problem, especially among pastors. Well, what happens? We put them in a duty, and what's our mentality? And this is kind of one of those core beliefs that drives the fruit. The core belief is sacrifice for the Lord. It's your duty to God to support the church, something like that. And Um, and that could be financially, that could be with your volunteering. And I think on just a basic logical, how do I say this? On the most basic logical reasoning, this doesn't really hold. Because, for example, if I would not just expect people to come over here and volunteer, and I have interns that give me 20 to 30 to 40 hours a week for free, but I would not anticipate them to come and sacrifice for the Lord. When they have families, we just had a guy that signed up. He's actually skipping his master's program to come and hang out with me, which is crazy and exciting. And but he wants real world business experience. He's like, I don't want another degree. But either way, he has 3 kids, a wife. He's got kind of 2 side hustles. And no, I'm not going to say come sacrifice for the Lord on top of all of the other things you're doing in your life. And what if we asked Pastor to do that? Like, Karen, if I flipped that around and said that to you and said, well, I've got a marketplace ministry over here at ClickMill where we help pastors reach their audiences, and you should come here and you should sacrifice to the Lord and help us reach other pastors. And you're like, well, I already work 40 hours a week and some overtime and I have a life. And it's like, well, it's your duty. And I kind of strong arm you into it. And you can see how very quickly, not only with me being like, all right, you're on web design duty, go get over there. You're taking the website. And you're like, I don't know how to do web design. Figure it out. We don't know either. And so now you're doing a thing maybe you're not fully prepared for, you're not fully trained for, you're not being poured into, and you're already exhausted as it is. And then we wonder where the volunteers are going. That's a problem. So we're putting all the resources at the front door. We're recruiting volunteers in a way that is not efficient or effective. And there's way better ways to do it that we'll get into. Have we discussed that at all?
No.
Okay. Well, there's way better ways.
It's
You'll
scary.
crush it. You'll crush it. And then what happens is that begins to lift the load off of pastor, because there are a lot of things to do in ministry. Oftentimes there are too many things to do because we're not making decisions, right? Scissio, we're not cutting off and pruning as we should. And so the ministry is not sustainable. And so that the course material we're going through, there are 3 phases to ministry growth in whatever way you want to define growth. It doesn't matter. Number 1, and it only took me like 20 years to figure this out, so this might be worth writing down. Number 1 is strategy. You got to know where you're going, which we talked about for a long time. Number 2 is sustainability. You cannot grow. You cannot find the way to grow, which is very hard to do, if you cannot sustain long enough to get there. And that's actually a concept from Charlie Munger, if you're familiar with Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett. And so that's called that is the mental model or decision-making model called inversion. He goes, obviously he was a secular investor, but he said, if you want to be rich, the first question you have to answer is how to not be poor. You've got to do that before you can get rich. And you've got to do that long enough to get any kind of, fruit. You've got to be able to stay in the game long enough to find the magic formula or whatever. So same thing here. If we want to grow, we first have to figure out how to not shrink. And that would be sustaining. And then lastly is growth in whatever way God is calling you to. It could be depth, it could be, breadth and size and numbers or whatever. So coming back to this, we bring in our volunteers, we put them to work over there, volunteering and serving for the Lord. And then that takes a little bit of load off of pastor. And then what does pastor do? Grabs more things and does more things. And then as this continues, because this is a non-sustainable system, volunteers start to get tired. They start to get disenfranchised and befuddled and whatever. And they start to go out the door. And this begins to drop more weight on pastor, who's already doing more than pastor should be doing. And pastor begins to panic. And then what happens? It reinforces the cycle, because pastor now needs more volunteers. So we throw more resources at the front door. We recruit volunteers faster, and then we put them to work, and pastor feels a little bit better. And then those volunteers burn out again. And this is a cycle that I have seen with a lot of clients that is very entrenched. It leads to congregants feeling taken advantage of and used. It leads to a lot of feeling disenfranchised. It leads to, what some people call church hurt. So not only do they not like that church, but they say, well, I had a bad experience in the Christian church and therefore churches are bad and, Jesus isn't even real. And of course that scales with the amount of, hurt people get in church. And obviously that can be very high. But any questions about how that process works?
No, everything you're saying, I understand completely.
any of those, do you see any of those characteristics in your own ministry?
Yeah, I think coming into a context, I've been here 12 years, but we're coming on our 110th anniversary of the church.
Wow.
And I think there are definitely things that we've always done that we haven't pruned. So, yeah, burnout or lack of key leadership coming forward is definitely an issue we're facing. So,
wow, great. Okay. So in regard to burnout is just the lack of an appropriate incentive structure. And so when people are burning out, it's just because the system is not set up correctly. And one of the things that we talk about in some of our decision-making models as we go forward are going to discuss how to tune a system so that it's fruitful, because you have dysfunctional systems and functional systems. And so systems theory is something that I've read pretty heavily into at this point. And we'll talk about some of those, because your church body is a system, and we need to make sure that things are set up properly so that people are not feeling burnt out. They're actually feeling excited. And the difference between feeling passionate and excited and burnt out is exactly the same stress. It's just a question of how they perceive the stress. And Tim Ferriss talks about this a lot in his book, The 4-Hour Work Week. I don't know why he calls it this, but he calls it eustress with a big Greek U, I think. Eustress being healthy stress. You're intentionally seeking out more stress because you perceive it taking you somewhere worth going or making you a certain type of person, as opposed to toxic stress, which is, I'm not learning anything from this and I'm just stressed out for the sake of being stressed out. So the incentives help to change the mindset of the person under the stress and help them to accept it. And not only accept it, but passionately accept it, like they're super excited. And what I think is this is sort of a key concept that ministries don't understand, because we need a lot more Christians under a lot more stress. We're not really doing a lot. We go to church and then we go home. We need to find a way to call Christians to action, to live their faith in a tangible way and to create fruit. So it's a get to work, suck it up, buttercup, and get to work. But you have to say that in the right context, and then they'll do it.
right.
And so we're gonna get into that. So coming back to this, when we look at Jesus' ministry, so let's say this is our ministry. So we've got the door and we've got the core, and there's Pastor Karen in the middle. Well, Jesus had the masses, and then he had the 72. I assume you're familiar with 72.
Yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool. And then he had the 12. And then he had the 3. And when we talk about Jesus and Jesus's own resource allocation, where did he put his resources? When we think about church today and then we think about Jesus' ministry, did he put his resources, and resources being time, energy, attention, finances, so what do we say, like physical energy running around the Holy Land, and mental energy preparing sermons and teachings and focusing, where did he put the majority of his energy? He did address the masses. He did go out and bless them and spend whole days with them and heal them and meet their needs. But then he got out of there as quick as he could and went up on a mountain and rested because it's exhausting. Okay, so the masses are, and how would I say this? In terms of, how do I say this? like, for example, if you buy a boat, like a lot of people are very cautious of buying boats because it's a money hole. You can just throw resources into this fixer-upper boat. Oh, it'll be a fun project. No, it'll drain your life savings and you'll be bankrupt and destitute because of that boat. And this is like a common story. Well, the same thing is true with the masses. It's not that we shouldn't be helping them. We should be helping them, but we should decide how much to help them, because if we just open the floodgates, we will flood the masses with blessing and all this stuff, and then we'll run out, because you can never, you know, it's a never ending need there. Well, so Jesus did open the floodgates. He did spend time, the 4,000, the 5,000, the healing, all of these things. And then he intentionally left. And we see in certain scriptures, and I'm sure you're familiar with what I'm talking about. I don't have the exact scripture, but he went and he left. He tried to get away. He went up on the mountainside to pray, and told the disciples, I'm going to meet you over wherever. And so he's then putting space between himself and the masses to recharge and to reconnect with God and allow God to pour back into him, because he used the physical resources and the mental resources that he had for that day. He's out. So he does spend resources on the masses, but who does he actually spend the majority of his resources with? Well, he spends more time with the 72, and even more time and attention and teaching and training on the 12. He lives with them every single day and travels around with them. That's a lot more resources than the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, that took one day, but he lives with the 12, and he teaches them and prepares them all day, every day for 3 years. And even further than that, Peter, James, and John got all the training of the 12 and the 72, but further, they got to go to the transfiguration. They saw the ascension, and like two other things I can't remember. Again, you're a pastor. I don't have to reference all the exact things. I know you know what I'm talking about. So they got additional training. And what you'll notice here is that the level of responsibility that Christ gave to these groups is dependent on the amount of investment that he first gave to them. So, and this is actually really interesting. And of course, like Peter, on this church, I'll build my rock, So obviously that's an easy one there. But what's really interesting is Jesus sends out the 72. I think there's even a little bit more evidence of this. I think it's an easy argument, but if I'm going for like specific passages, I think there's evidence of this in Jesus sending them out. But I would say this: when Jesus talks to the masses, he sends them away, says, go and sin no more, go home, that kind of thing. When he calls the disciples, he says, follow me. So there's instantly a bigger, if he's going to give more, you have to commit more. And I think that that's implicit in the scriptures. Now, further than that, we know that the 12 disciples were called to sacrifice up into martyrdom for 11 of the 12, or I guess 11 of the 13, because Judas doesn't count, but whatever. The 72, we don't really know, but we know that there were a lot of martyrs in that sort of first century. So some of these presumably would have been killed for their faith, but all of the 12 were killed for their faith. So there's a higher level of sacrifice that was implicit in the time with Christ, because the world hated him. Now, what's also interesting, and I think that there's maybe a little evidence of this in the scripture. So when we look at let's see, Jesus sends out the 72 and Jesus sends out the 12. I'll show you this. NIV, here we go. Jesus sends out the 12. Okay. Okay. And this is verse 9. So this is Matthew 10, verse 9. So this is the 12 who he's given more time to and more training to than the 72. And he lives with these guys. So they've gotten a higher level of training and attention and sanctification, whatever you want to call it. And he says, do not get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts, no bag for the journey, or extra shirts or sandals or staff for the worker is worth their keep. Whatever. Oh. Well, maybe, you know what? There's a couple of these. I may be looking at the wrong passage. ESV sends out. Let me look at the second one. Luke 9. In one of these, it's very explicit and it just says, take nothing with you. And that's kind of what I'm looking for here. And I'm not going to say this is like hard gospel, but it is interesting. And he called him 12 disciples and authority over unclean spirits. Okay. Here he charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag. So this is Mark 6:17 through 13. So in this, he says, take nothing, but wear your sandals. Don't take your tunics, your extra clothes for the sun. That's the tunic. Okay, so he gave them a lot of instruction on things not to take. And in the Mark account, he says, take nothing extra, just your staff. Now, when you look at the 72 and we come over here, see there's two accounts of this. We'll pull both of these open. Oh, is this? Okay. So when he sends out the 72, he says, do not take a purse or a bag or sandals. Do not greet anyone on the road. And so that's one, do not take a purse or bag or sandals. And then coming down here, let's see if it says this one here. Then she says, okay. Wow, this is a very large passage for that one piece there.
Yeah.
Well, either way. So to the 12, he stipulates that they should take nothing. And to the 12, and again, I think maybe a little bit deeper research on this might make this a little bit more sound, but just based on a surface level reading, take nothing with you in one passage where he's telling them not to take a couple things with them to the 72. And if that's the case, if we were to look into that deeper, it would make sense because the 72 have faith that is comparable to their level of training from Christ. And then the 12, of course, their faith is going to be proportionate to their level of training, and more is asked. So that's one place I kind of see that. But either way, that's a kind of a small argument in there, but we can obviously see this more broadly. Jesus tells the masses to go and sin no more. He tells the three that they're going to have extra responsibilities. He's, obviously calling the 12 to be the disciples and the leaders of the church and to die for their faith ultimately. And we also see this in a ramping up sort of cycle where he first calls them, and this is getting into a little bit of marketing. He first calls them and says, all you have to do right now is just follow me, which is already a big enough call to action. And this is going back to that strategy where we kind of take everything from that linear, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and we get to the vision, but we just kind of take all that and just cram it down all at the same time. Each one of those is a call to action. Oh, you did this, now do this. Well, you can see this through the course of Jesus' ministry. He doesn't start with, all right, you 12, go out there and die for me. You're crazy. I'm going to go back to my boat. What did he do? He said, just follow me. And that, leave everything. That's a big enough call to action. But there was presumably also a proportionate or even bigger reward for them because they're going to get education. They're going to get this calling. They're going to get to study the things of God instead of fish. So that was big enough. Well, what happens as they've got teaching and training under their belt? He says, okay, practice mission, go and take nothing with. It's like, whoa, take nothing with us. No gold. Yes, this is about faith. So we're going to put this faith that we've been building, we're going to test it, and we're going to see if you endure this trial. And of course they do. And they come back, and then there's more teaching and testing. And then he's like, all right, well, we're going to, I'm going to die and then be resurrected. And then you're going to go out and you're going to die. And then there's the real thing. So you'll see that there's even sort of this churchgoer journey for Christ's disciples that he's taking them through. He's preparing them for harder and harder struggles. So all of that to say that Christ is preparing the disciples and his following and giving them responsibility proportionate to their level of commitment to him and his level of training. So as they commit more, he prepares more. And you can only prepare so many people because, again, the masses have this just infinite need. And so we've got to pick and choose somehow in regard to what happens. So what Jesus did then is he flip-flopped this from how we see it today. He allocated the majority of his resources to the people in the center. And this is his resource allocation method. So how does this look? He goes out to the masses. He meets deeply felt needs. He did that before he had any disciples. That's what he did. He went to the boats. He did the healing. He gave fishermen who needed fish, right? Maybe we'd call that like a terrestrial need. It was not a spiritual need. It was a, what do you want to say? Not worldly and a sinful, but earthly in the sense that they just had a need. Food, fish, finances, stuff like that. Physical health needs. And so he goes around, he's healing people. He's meeting needs. He is giving preaching, but primarily it's more like miraculous meeting of needs. And as people see this, they either choose to follow him or they don't. And one example of they don't choose to follow him is the wealthy, the rich young ruler, who says, I've done all the 10 commandments. What else must I do to follow you? And he says, well, go give away all your possessions to the poor and then come follow me. And he's like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. So people have the choice to follow Christ or not to follow Christ. And the more that they commit to him, the more resources he commits to them. And then it seems as though he holds them accountable for the resources they have been given. So the more they know and the more training they have, the higher the accountability they have to live that out to whatever capacity. So then the question is, how does this work for our ministries? Well, as I was looking at this for ClickMill, I was saying, well, if this is true, who's who? Because like the church years ago, I was putting all my time into the masses. And for me, that is YouTube and blogs and all this social media out there with people who don't know me and who aren't committed to me. Okay, well, who's my actual? So if that's the masses, then who's my 72? Well, this would be users, free downloads, like for like a lead magnet. They downloaded the ebook, they got their free course, commenters in the blog, people who are there. This might be like our first time visitor at church, something like that. People who are there, but they're not really 100% committed, but they're involved. So that's in marketing what we would call a conversion. They went from being a passive bystander, which would be the masses, and they gave name, email, phone number, or just name and email, and they're there, and they've engaged. Okay, so we've got those. Well, who's my 12? And I started thinking about this, and I was like, well, my 12 then must be clients. They're people who've come through the system, like yourself, and I'm pouring into them and I'm building their systems and I'm spending time with them. And that's the 12. And the goal is to give whatever I have to give, whatever talents God's given me, and to hand those off and to make ministry leaders more effective. So that's my 12. But what's my 3? And it occurred to me that my 3, and I didn't realize this at the time, was actually my interns. Oh, huh. Well, my internship was set up very similar to a volunteer sort of position. And so this is the difference here. And you'll kind of see where the solution starts coming into play to these volunteer and burnout issues. When we have a volunteer, and I do not like volunteer, I like intern because that's just a modern word for disciple. When people come into ClickMill, they don't want to come work for me for free. They want to be me. They want to learn the things that I know how to do so that they can go out and become Christian entrepreneurs. They want to build websites for churches professionally, and I train them. And yes, they do work for me, but only as a means to further their own training. And then they go out and I support them after they go out. So we'll talk about maybe what that looks like. But the way in which the church sees the volunteer from a sacrifice to the Lord sort of thing is we take, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. Um, oh, you come in and sacrifice for the Lord and do this work for us because we're doing the Lord's work, which is more important than what you would otherwise be doing with your time. And that can definitely rub people the wrong way. What is instead more effective is you have, and this is building off of a marketing framework called story brand, which is the other person is always the hero in their story. And what we do in ministries is we say, well, the ministry's the hero. We're saving people, and you are but a cog in the machine to help us do the noble work of the Lord. And that's the message that we pass off. Well, instead, the actual way to get people to work like you'd never believe is to say, forget about us. The church, we don't matter. The church exists to support you, and God has a powerful call for your life. And I actually believe that with my interns. I look around at the church marketing world. It's abysmal. Churches operate like they're in 1980, and the culture is very rapidly moving away from the church. So, I think Barna recently in the last 3 or 4 years said that the US is no longer a Christian nation. So we have our first secular generation. So it's like, so I actually believe that they are called to make an impact with their life and to do kingdom work, not for salvation, but like I actually believe that. And I actually believe they're going to have to get their behind in gear and get to it. And I actually believe to develop the skills that they need, it's not something that they're going to be able to do in an hour a week or something. Like you've got to get in here and you need experience. And I'll give it to you and I'll give you projects. You'll work on real stuff. You're going to track your hours. You're going to track the number of articles that you get to page one of Google. You're going to get opportunities. I just handed off a whole web build to one of my interns who's been with me for 6 months. And I said, you're going to build the whole thing and I'm going to review it with you and give you constructive feedback on how to do it better next time and other things that we'll critique. And then that's in your portfolio. And she wants to do social media and design for ministries. That's like 100 hours of work that I'm not going to do. And not only am I not going to do it, but because the way that I see the work, I don't expect Sophie to sacrifice for the Lord and come do my work. Sophie realizes that when I tell her you have a powerful purpose and God is going to use you. And I believe that. And also you need a lot of training. And in a 6-month internship, I'm trying to teach you 20 years worth of material. And it's like a fire hydrant for 3-hour stretches twice a week. And then they do 20 to 30 hours of homework on the back end. They're actually getting the experience. And when they leave, they actually get jobs with other Christian marketing firms. They actually get jobs with churches and advertising companies. And I'll actually go to bat and I'll give them references. And we've got a group of people who've graduated the program, and we all talk about how we can support each other and further kind of propel. So the goal there is not to meet the needs of the church, come in here and help us because pastor's exhausted and how could you leave? Actually, it's really funny because Sophie said as she started taking on the internship, she was actually feeling very guilty and I think was probably being guilted by the people at her church because she was wanting to shift and they were offering her the digital component since now she's getting experience and she's showing some things that she's doing in the internship here. But they were saying, no, you can't just do the digital side, which is a lot as it is. I don't know how familiar you are, but they were saying you have to continue working with the cleaning crew too, because they can't do it without you. That's not her problem. That's not her problem. And that's not, and so we really had to talk about that. And I had to tell her, I'm very entrepreneurial. She's very employee minded. And so I said, listen, if you're going to work at a ministry, you have to understand that that comes baked into the cake. And you have to be comfortable, respectfully and lovingly say, I can only do so much because you will burn out. That's how this works. And so we went through that, and she started beginning to understand that. But to that end, coming back, um, when you put the disciple, I guess is really just the way this is, when you put the disciple at the center of their own story and you make them the hero and you empower them and you say, God has the most powerful calling for your life, and we're going to do everything we can to prepare you for it, they'll do whatever you want, because what the world is not giving people is, and I don't mean that in a manipulative way. I mean that in a win-win way. And so the way in which I structure everything I do at ClickMail is it's always a bigger win for the other person than it is for me, but it's always a big win for me. Nobody has to lose. There's always enough for this. And so when I have interns, they come in for 6 months and they commit to a minimum 20 hours a week. And I've had interns that do 6 straight hour training calls multiple times a day, or excuse me, multiple times a week, to 6 hours a week. So it just depends on what their actual availability is for the in-person. Now I have a lot of calls filmed already, so I can just send them and they can watch it on their own time and then do the projects. But it's like a minimum of 500 hours. And it's not for me, it is for me, but it's for their own. If you say you have 500 hours of digital marketing experience and you've got references and you've got articles that rank 1 on Google, and they bring in 1,000 people a month each, and you get whatever job you want. That's good marketing. That's right. And so it's so interesting because when you set things up like this, Karen, they don't even understand what's happening, right? So when we're talking about strategy and trying to see things from a very functional, fruit-oriented level, for example, I was having a conversation with Sophie, who actually graduated the internship on the 31st of last month. And we were having a conversation about what she wanted to do, because we have interns that stay for a year. They say, well, I don't feel like I've learned everything I want to learn. I want to stay longer. And it's like, sure, But I asked her, what do you want to do? Are you moving on? Are you going to, or do you want to stay longer? Like, what do you want to do? And what she said was, and this just means I hadn't taught well enough, but what she said was, well, you've already given me so much time. And you've got these other interns, and, I don't want to take advantage of your time. She thought she was taking advantage of me. And I'm like, I don't think I've explained this very well. I don't think you're seeing the bigger picture. And I was out. So I explained to her, I was like, Sophie, this is a win-win. I give you 6 hours a week and you're working 30 hours a week. I was like, I literally could not do the thing. And of course, there's a time and place for them to actually understand this. But I was like, I literally could not do the things I'm doing if you weren't supporting me. I was like, you are not a drain on my time. I was like, you're like one of the biggest returns on my time that I have, you and the other interns. I said, what if you want to stay? I said, I'm just going to give you harder work to prepare you for harder tasks. So you've mastered blogging, you've mastered search engine optimization, you're mastering web design, you're mastering landing page design and keyword research. Like, you do professional level marketing at this point. Now I'm going to give you management tasks. We have 2 other interns that come in on January the 1st, and you're going to train them. And I'm going to train you to train them. So now she's doing my role, and all I have to do is train a trainer. And she's got access to all the training material and all the, she knows how to work the website, all this stuff. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so now you're going to know how to run a team. Well, what happens if I don't like running a team? Great. You'll know you don't like running teams. And when you get a job in the future working for a church, you'll know to tell them, I'm not running teams. She's like, that's actually really great. And then it's, well, we have web design coming in. Do you want to take that? She's like, I'd love to take that. Okay, great. So you're going to take that. So she's overseeing 2 other people and she's designing an entire website by herself. I'm giving her more work to keep her engaged because she's mastered the lower level stuff. And she's more excited than when she started with, the easier stuff. So when you phrase it like this, and it's for the benefit and the future calling of your congregants, you can just keep giving them more and more and more, and they're more excited because you are actually preparing them for their calling. And this is then, of course, when you put this in terms of your ministry, how do you do this? Well, I think that when we look at Acts and we see that the people were occasionally selling their properties and giving the funds to the church, and then Paul and whoever, not Paul, the disciples were spreading that out. What's interesting is within the church, so that no one among their number had need. Okay, so what that means is we're not taking people, and I'm going to tie this together. I know that's jumping subjects. The people are coming into the church, and what we do today is we say, hey, sacrifice to the Lord, give us money, and then we go give it to an endless bottomless hole over here. And then what happens? Why can't we keep people in the church? Because there's all this need, and people go where their needs are met, and they stay where their needs are met consistently. So people aren't coming in the front door because no one's telling anybody that you're meeting needs, so nobody cares. That's word of mouth marketing, and that's the most effective form of marketing. Like if pastors actually listen to me, I wouldn't have a job, because if you promised to meet needs, people would come in and they would tell people. There is that is a biblical passage that we've looked at. I think we looked at this where Jesus is healing, and then they go all over Syria and bring all their people, and then he heals them, and then they go all over Israel and Jerusalem and across the Jordan and bring more people to him. So that is what happens when you meet needs. People come to you, and then when you continue to meet needs, they continue to follow you, which is what we see him, which he's trying to get away from the crowds, because every time the crowds bump into him, he's meeting their needs. So they keep following him until he tries to run away. And so what we do is we say, oh, hello, masses, welcome to church on Sunday. We're going to take your finances and we're going to go give them to these people over here. Those people over there are not committed to the church. You're not teaching them, training them, discipling them. And these people over here have needs, and we're not meeting them. And so they're going away. And so we self-destruct our own ministries. Does that cycle kind of make sense? Instead,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay. So instead, what would be more functional is we get the masses and they come into our ministries on Sundays, and we figure out what the biggest problem of that group of people is. And that's kind of where we talk about, meeting needs, solving problems, and making mistakes and taking massive action until we figure it out. Those are kind of the core values at ClickMill, and this is why. And so what we do is we figure out what their biggest problem is, and we commit earnestly to do whatever it takes to make their life, basically like the goal is to make the church the Garden of Eden. We are going to focus on this congregation, and we are going to build you up and help you solve the most difficult problems in your life until you don't have any. And you know what they're going to do? As soon as you actually follow on that, it is going to be just like these people who Jesus is healing them. And they're so excited. They're like, oh my gosh, you won't even understand. My wife and I were fighting. We were fighting for a decade, and we hated each other, and we were going to get a divorce. And it was only a question of who had the kids. And then we started going to Pastor Karen's church, and we went through these intensive marriage seminars, and she gave us a swift kick in the butt and told us to grow up because God's got bigger plans for our life than to bicker with each other, and we needed to be on a team. And we went through, a year of twice a week marriage classes and whatever it is. And we love our marriage. You got to go to Pastor Karen's church. That's what'll happen. And that's just marriage. So depending on the vision of your church, when you structure it that way, what happens is we move from an inward focused church, which is how do we get more volunteers? How do we get more leaders? How do we, increase tithe? How do we do all this stuff? and you cut all that stuff because that's this inward focus, and we miss other people's needs when we're trying to figure that out. It's just a bunch of sort of silver bullets or ploys to strong arm people in. Well, it's their duty to God. So instead, what we say is, what are their biggest problems? How do we solve them? What kind of classes? What kind of resources? And if finances are an issue, what you're initially going to realize is you're going to have to cut a lot of stuff that's been there probably for a long time, because those things were put in place and they were functional for a long time because they met the needs of the congregation, and that's not there anymore. So those have got to go. And then we have to discover what the needs of the congregation are. And it's as simple as, what's your biggest problem? What's your biggest need you're facing in your life right now? Don't put your name on the paper. And then you reorient the ministry around those things, and helping your congregation to, what do you want to say? Have the most functional possible life, so that they are then capable of serving the kingdom from a position of abundance, if that makes sense. And offering marriage classes, it's like, well, let's say there's 4 steps to a healthy marriage, and first is communication, and then is grace, and then whatever it is, stop yelling, or I don't know, but whatever it is, when you get people who've gone through that whole process, then their job is the marriage ministry in your church, and they go back and then they start training people, but they're super passionate about that. Like, my wife, like, I love apologetics. If you wanted me to go into a church, and I've had Christian schools and churches have me teach apologetics for long stretches, but it's like, I'd do that for free just because I love it, because I'm teaching people how to defend their faith, and they realize, like, you've got better reasons than the atheists to be Christians, and better reasons than the Buddhists, and all this stuff. And you don't have to question your faith. I would just do that 2 or 3 times a week for fun, but they want me to volunteer at the door. And so it's like, you've got people who want to be evangelists. I know exactly what you need to do. How do you feel about talking to people you've never met? Oh, it makes me super nervous. Okay, so you're feeling called to be an evangelist. You need to go to the front door. You need to greet for a time. When you master it, then we're going to move from there. Well, what do I do then? Well, they master it, and it turns out they're the best greeter. Now you're going to train the greeters. Now you're going to lead the evangelism team, or whatever it is, and you continue to challenge them. And the goal, Pastor Karen, and I think this is the crux, and we'll close with this: people don't volunteer because they want to volunteer. Nobody's online saying how to give away my time to ministry. Nobody's online saying how to give away my money. The reason that I have interns come in and you have volunteers come in is because they want to be you. That is what they're telling you. They want to be Pastor Karen. So when they sign up and they never see Pastor Karen, or they never see whichever pastor, and they don't get any intentional training, it won't ever work, because they're just going to say, well, the purpose I thought was here isn't here. The direction I thought was here isn't here. I'm just taking the trash out every week and sacrificing to the Lord. Instead, and this will blow your mind, and I would challenge you to do it, if you gave a call to action and said, my 3, whoever those people are, you're going to get exclusive invitations to come to church 20 hours a week. Maybe this is like teens, college age kids, but usually that's a good age range. And I'm going to teach you how to do every single thing I do. You're going to get hands-on pastoral training from a pastor who's doing pastoring. And if you decide you want to go to a Bible college, I will give you a reference. We will track your hours. We'll track the skills that you develop. And then you literally have 4 Pastor Karens, and all you have to do is teach them. And to this end, I have like 300 blogs that I didn't write. I was writing blogs for years, and I had like 50, because the blogs I write are really long. And I started getting interns, and they started working 20 to 30 hours a week. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough work for them. What am I going to do? Let me teach you how to blog. And then we went from 3 clicks a day to 1,000 clicks a day in like 15 months, you know? And so when there's 4 of you, you don't grow linearly, you grow exponentially. And that's what you will see happening. And it's like, well, gosh, then I've got to like deal with people all day long. Yeah, totally. teach them how to do all the things you do, and then give it to them. Because in order for them to do what you do, they have to do the menial tasks that you have to do. You know, you teach them how to write a sermon, and then you say, great, you get one sermon a month, you get one sermon a month, you get one sermon a month. And what do? All you do is you teach them how to do it. You do one with them, which takes a little time. You have them do the second one and you review it. You have them do the third one and then you review it. And once they've got a handle on it, let them write sermons and let them preach. If that's something that, I mean, obviously pastors should be preaching, but whatever, whatever the task is, you just hand it off. And what I am shocked at, the things I get tired of writing articles. I get tired of doing, follow-ups and like all these different things. They're happy to do it. And they'll do it hundreds and hundreds of times. And they'll be like, can I do more blogs this week? And it's like, yes, please, just whatever you want. Uh, so any thoughts or questions on kind of restructuring your ministry? And this is what I would just call a discipleship format.
Yeah.
You're preparing them to make to live a kingdom life. Any thoughts or questions?
It's interesting. I feel like I was probably doing that intuitively with the youth ministry, but I haven't transferred it over to adult ministry in the same way. And I've always found that the youth have more time or more interest or want to be more like you, right? Whereas the adults, it's a little harder to figure that out. So,
and if I could, youth are actively looking for purpose, and they'll just tell you as much. As soon as they know you care, they're like, great, where should I?
Yeah.
That's the reason I went to Bible college. I probably should have gone to some kind of engineering school. Even I had a professor tell me that in my psychology class at Bible school. He's like, why are you even here? Your personality is way off for this school. But yeah, my youth pastor was like, oh, you don't know what you're going to do? You'd be a great youth pastor. And it's like, oh, all right, I'll do that. In regard to, people that are older and more mature, they're a little bit more set in their ways, as you would know, like old wineskins type of thing. And the way in which I have found that you can begin to break that is to pitch a vision that is bigger than their current way of thinking is capable of attaining. And you can just look at their lives and say, what are they capable of doing? And then make something that requires them to break that. And it should break you too, because if the vision is big enough that Pastor Karen and whatever other pastors can do by themselves, nobody's going to commit. But if you're like, listen, we're going to reach 10,000 people in our community with the gospel message, and they're going to show up in this church over the course of the next 12 months, I don't know, whatever it is you want to do. And I can't do it by myself. And then you just start tracking your numbers every week when everybody's committed and you're like, well, nobody showed up and this is the new vision for the church. And I reached 14 people last week. And so at this rate, I'm going to be doing this much, but I can't do it without you. So show up to our evangelism class, show up to our whatever class. We're getting prepared. I'm going to do this with you or without you, but God has a powerful call on you and he has a powerful call in this church and I need you. That forces them to grow because you can't sit in the audience and then not do something after that. That's a very, you're looking around and you're like, nobody else is doing it either. Like, she's talking to me now. So that's one thing you can do. Pull up a bigger call. And then lastly, and I do have to go, what was the other? I had one more point. The vision for the church is bigger, and then the emphasis on their own personal responsibility and their own, what do you want to say, hero status in God's story for them. You lift that up. God has you here for such a time as this, and these are the problems in the church, and he's got this for you. He's got this for you. He knows you're going to need to grow in order to do this. And we want to support you. We've got this class. We've got this class. And then what's going to happen? You're going to be with us for a certain amount of time. I'm not trying to hold on to you. Go out and then go do it. If you, in whatever it is. And I do that with my interns, but the thing is they don't want to go because I'm actually giving them so much value. They're like, well, I want to stick around. I had one guy who stayed for a year. I've had two that have stayed for a year and a half. And after a while, I start paying them for projects and stuff. So then, they have an actual title. And so when you emphasize their importance in the kingdom and the things that God wants to do through them, and you just speak the truth the way you understand it, it will motivate them to become more than what they are. And that's the way you break it. For kids, they're already trying to find purpose and be more than what they are. With adults, you've got to push it on them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's my assessment there. Thank you so much for being here today. And I apologize, but I've got a call that started 2
No worries.
ago. So yeah, I'd love to hear more thoughts on this next week, and we'll keep going. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brett.
God bless, Pastor Karen.
Bye.